don't be me in this story from 7 years ago. I mean, this is a building now that's worth over 200 grand a door probably, and we could have bought it for 60 a door. Would have been a completely life-changing deal. And it's really the one that I think of, because we offered on hundreds and hundreds of deals that if we had bought it at the price we offered, we would have made a ton of money, right? Everybody has those stories. And if you're in real estate for long enough, you're going to have a couple of real painful ones about the deals that got away. And this is kind of the big one for me. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another quick solo episode here on the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing a story about a deal that, frankly, myself and a partner at the time just whiffed on. This is back in 2018, 19, couple of years into the business. And it's a story that I want to tell because I think there are some learning lessons in here for investors who are newer or investors who may be experienced that are looking to start buying larger deals or who are looking to scale their business and jump into doing either larger deals or deals of different asset classes, etc. And the lessons that I learned in the failed pursuit of this deal are still ones I think about now. And I've now become a different version of the story, which I'll share a little bit more about when I get into it. But in general, this isn't one of those like, oh, should have bought that deal because now it's worth X stories, which everybody has a whole bunch of versions of. I think anybody who could have bought real estate, 2016 to 2020 or whatever the time frame you want to use is, or kind of use to describe that, would have bought all the deals they could have got their hands on, right? But in this particular situation, this is a deal that we did not get for reasons that were entirely within our control and that, we knew that we whiffed at the time. So let's go back to 2018, 2019. A contact, a friend of mine at the time, we were sending out direct mail pieces, trying to find bigger deals. And we got a hold of a seller who had a 40-unit building in a C-class area in New Hampshire, just to leave it vague. And textbook mom and pop owner, had owned it for a long time, had minimal debt, rents were low, but the building was in great shape and they were looking to sell it. It had a lot of attributes of what we define as our holy grail multifamily deal, which I did a podcast episode on a while ago. And I think I may actually do another podcast episode on in the next couple of weeks because some of those attributes have changed over the last couple of years. But regardless, had all the qualities of a deal that we really wanted to pursue. And at the time, was earlier in the investing career. Both myself and my would-be partner on that deal had done a handful of smaller deals that were, 2 to 10 units in size. And this was going to be a big step up for us. Now, we knew that the seller wanted a price through our negotiations and through walking the building, et cetera, that was extremely reasonable for what it was. And we knew that if we had gotten it at this price, which at the time was somewhere in the mid 50s or 60K unit range, it would have been an amazing deal. Like at the time, it was one of those where like we knew it would have been a great deal the second we bought it. It wasn't like we had any issues with the price that we had to pay. We knew that if we paid 60 a unit that we could have quickly sold, refied, whatever for 80, 85 a unit like right away. This is again back in like 2018, 19 timeframe. And unfortunately, we weren't the only buyer pursuing this deal, which was unbeknownst to us. And as we were working through the negotiating process, the seller really wanted us to remove the financing contingency that we had on the deal. That said, we weren't really comfortable doing so because we were putting up a big chunk of earnest money relative to the amount of money that we had available, liquid at that time. And we did have a due diligence contingency so we could go through and look at the leases and do our inspections and all that. But the seller really wanted to remove the financing contingency because he had, as we found out late in the negotiations, another buyer who was willing to waive the financing contingency. So while we're hemming and hawing over whether or not we're comfortable doing that or able to do that, seller just emails us and says, hey, I just signed with this other buyer. Sorry, thanks for your time. And it was immediately a punch to the gut at the time. Like I remember reading that and we were like so bummed that we missed the deal because it was a great deal of large size. And we lost it because we just tiptoed around and were too afraid to drop a financing contingency for a couple of reasons. And these are the reasons, or these are the lessons I think that I've really taken from this. One, because at the time, that's what we were told you should do in a contract, right? You should have a financing contingency because if your financing doesn't come in at what you want to have an out as a buyer, right? That's kind of what we were told by the people that we knew at the time. And this is before the craze of like COVID in 2021, 22, that 3-year stretch where You literally couldn't include any contingencies outside of some, DD contingencies for all those deals at that time. This is kind of before the market really went nuts. And we just did it because that's what we thought you had to do. We thought standard terms. You got your financing contingency, you got your due diligence contingency. We didn't really know or have the frame of reference to understand that you could remove that. And, lesson number one here is don't be so anchored to quote unquote standard terms when you're pursuing deals. And a lot of inexperienced buyers, they just have their standard set of terms. I need my 30 days for DD and I need my 60 days for financing and I want to close in 90. Different deals call for different types of terms just at a high level, right? And you should be willing to get really creative on your terms for each individual deal that you pursue relative to what that deal calls for. Now, outside of that too, if you have a deal that's extremely compelling from a price standpoint, you should feel more comfortable removing contingencies, even if you feel like you're stretching, which dovetails into, lesson number two, which is we should have just tied this up and then went to other investors in our network who were more experienced and asked for help. Like, I guess the other piece of this is one, you need to be really confident that you're buying a good deal. If you're not confident in the deal being good, well then okay, you're not going to have the confidence to tie it up, put some earnest money down, and go out there and have these conversations with other investors or partners or whoever. But if you are really confident in the deal, again, let's say your competence breeds confidence, as I always say. You've underwritten a ton of deals in this area. You've got this one under contract at, or you could put it under contract at X price. You have all these comps and all this market knowledge that dictate that it's worth this price. Yeah, maybe it's a bigger deal. Maybe you're putting down more earnest money, but just go for it, right? You should just be putting it under contract and then very quickly having conversations with other people in your network around, hey, I have this deal under contract. This is the price. What do you think is a deal structure that might make sense? Do you want to propose something that would make sense? And start to have those conversations quickly. And I remember at the time, I was talking to a much more experienced investor who I just chatted with here and there, who, was somebody that I had in my network. And I told him a story about this. This is way back like a week after this happened. And he's like, and I'm going to make it PG. He's like, you dumb. Like, what were you doing? Like, tie that up. I would have just given you half the money, but you could have split it. Like, what are you doing? And I remember thinking at the time, like, oh, duh. Like, why wouldn't I do that? And at the time, I didn't really understand that collaboration really is the key to growing a business when you don't have all of the resources at your disposal. If you don't have the investors in your network, or you don't personally have the cash, or you don't have the balance sheet to sign the debt, that doesn't mean you can't pursue a great deal and then have someone else help you put it together. And oftentimes we're so worried about, okay, well, how do I propose the partnership? Let the person you're bringing the deal to propose something to you and help you put something together that might make sense for you, which is something I think that's oftentimes a roadblock for folks. Well, I don't even know how that would work. Well, just ask. If you just ask, well, then you may just be, give the person who has all the resources the ability to propose a deal structure that makes sense and potentially teach you something as well as close the deal. So, that's kind of lesson number two. And lesson number three is if you've got a due diligence contingency of any reasonable length of time, a couple of weeks plus, like you can tie it up and you can really quickly figure out the rest of the stuff in like a day or two. And I think many people underestimate how many phone calls and conversations you can have with like a few days. Like you can talk to everyone in your network in a couple days, which is a vague statement to be making on a podcast here, but again, generally speaking, like if you really get on your horse, you can get a lot of the answers to all the questions that make you uncomfortable. Well, I don't know who might lend on it. Well, I don't know who could potentially partner with me on it. Well, I don't really know like what this is really, I have a really good sense of what it's worth, but I don't really know. I should probably talk to a broker and get their sense. You can have all of those questions in like 2 days. Or conversations, I should say. And yeah, maybe you're not getting the commitment from the bank or the commitment from the investor that, hey, I'm going to give you X dollars, but you're going to get a really good sense of all of the different things around the edges within that period of time. Yeah, we love lending on deals like that. We'll definitely get you a term sheet and here's what's required from you as a borrower. Okay, so now you get a pretty good sense on the lending side. Same thing on the equity side. Yeah, hey, you've got, or I should say equity partner, LP, whatever side. Oh, that's a great deal. Yeah, I'll 100% split it with you. This is how we could structure it. I'll take care of this XY 30-minute conversation. If you're speaking with somebody who's competent on the other end of the phone. We just assume that all of those conversations would be hard to have. We just assume that we had to have our standard terms We just assumed that we weren't competing with anybody else. We assumed we had more time. And all of those things are really dangerous, especially when you're direct to seller, you got a good price. Like you should just jump, figure it out later, assuming the deal really makes sense. Now, if you're looking at a deal where you're like iffy on the price and all this stuff, well, then yeah, maybe you shouldn't be acting so aggressively. But in this situation, the story that I'm telling, that wasn't the case. Now, to round out the story, what did this look like? I mean, this is a building now that's worth over 200 grand a door, probably. And we could have bought it for 60 a door 5, 6 years ago. It would have been a completely life-changing deal. And it's really the one that I think of, because we offered on hundreds and hundreds of deals that if we had bought it at the price we offered, we would have made a ton of money, right? Everybody has those stories. And if you're in real estate for long enough, you're going to have a couple of real painful ones about the deals that got away. And this is kind of the big one for me. And it's mainly because it was controllable, because we were right at the finish line and we just whiffed on it, not because we didn't think, it's not like the market appreciated and that's why we whiffed on it. It's like it would have been worth a ton more than we paid the day after we closed in that moment of time. And we just didn't do it because of just stupidity and inexperience and lack of conviction, which is tough. And what's interesting is now I've been on the other side of this. The investor who bought this deal was an experienced, older investor that was willing to waive the financing contingency and close a little bit faster. Great. As time has passed, I've become that person in a lot of the deals that we pursue, where we're competing with people that are acting with trepidation and they're nervously, including weird terms, or they're slow to reply, or they're not acting confidently, or they're like, yeah, actually, I got to chat with my lender before I can get you an answer on whether or not I can waive the contingency or do this or do that. And now we act with so much speed and conviction on the deals we pursue that we blow those people out of the water. And that happens all the time. And additionally, the amount of times I tell newer investors, like, hey, if you just find a deal that you think makes sense, just come to me and I'll propose a structure. Like, don't feel nervous about bringing us a deal as a potential partner or investor if you're just like confused over how it might get put together or confused as to how that process works. I'm like, I'll explain the whole thing to you. We'll talk about how we've structured it with other investors. We'll talk about what we perceive to be a fair split, fair structure, what you need to do, what we need to do, what the entire process looks like from a legal standpoint. Here are the docs that we draft. Here's what's going to happen after we close. Here's what's going to happen when we go chat with the lender and who's going to sign the debt. We'll talk about all that. All we really care about is you find a deal at a good price, and then let's talk about it. We can have all of these conversations, and we remove the confusion and the fear around tie up a deal and then go bring it to us for us to chat about. And I think that's the big takeaway for me now, years later, is like, one, I really communicate this to early investors, like, don't be me in this story from 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And then when we pursue deals where we're the people who are actively pursuing it, like, we act in accordance to how do we be that guy that blew us out of the water back in 2018, where we whiffed on that deal that would have really changed our careers. So hopefully you guys learned something out of that story, especially for those of you who are actively pursuing multifamily deals. A bit of a rambling one without a real clear resolution, but I think that there's probably going to be some tidbits in there that I got to imagine some of the newer investors will take something away from. If you did take something away from it, please consider leaving the podcast a rating and a review. Coming up on 300 episodes, trying to cross the 300 review mark on iTunes before we get to 300 podcast episodes released on the feed. So if you've learned anything in the 5+ years we've been doing this podcast, takes you 2 seconds to just tap a 5-star review on the feed, and it means a lot to us on the production side. So if you haven't yet, please do so. But again, thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.